Hi, my name is KellyPatterson. I've done the Cultural Immersion Experience on homelessness. In this presentation, I'm going to be going over the 4 key elements of my research, the current and historical oppression, the 3 documentaries I watched, the interviews I conducted, and a summary of what I have found and the practical applications to counseling. One of the studies I found showed that 90% of the homeless population, compared to only 39% of the general population, had experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, including direct trauma such as abuse or neglect, and indirect traumas like mental illness or domestic violence. And then similarly, more than half the homeless population had experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, compared to only 3 to 5% of the general population. And the difference in quality of life was also studied to kind of see, is everyone kind of living the same experience being homeless? And what was found was that the older women who had experienced only one episode of homelessness and had the lowest scores on criminal records, they actually had the highest quality of life. And those who had high rates of personality disorders, substance abuse disorders, mental health disorders, and also a high criminal record, they had the least quality of life. And what I learned about the attitudes and beliefs was the drug use as part of community. It sounded like they really value that, and there's this common attitude among the homeless population that if someone's not doing the drugs, they're kind of excluded from the group because they don't like it as much. And the beliefs that others have about them, they felt that they said that sometimes when they go and get medical care, the nurses, they seem disgusted with them and afraid of them. As far as customs, practices, and behaviors, daily drug use among those 18 to 25 years of age, it was found that 61% of them use drugs at least one time daily. Another area of expertise and behaviors that they were referred to as were car keepers, cargo unloaders, paper or can pickers, among other things. As far as current and historical events that had an impact on society's perceptions, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest did have a negative influence on mental illness, and when they showed a documentary where it showed a more positive aspect, it did not change their perception after seeing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. HUD has said that the homeless population has increased 4 years in a row, and there was an article done in San Francisco that showed that, they looked at 53 blocks in San Francisco. They found every block that was littered with trash. 41 blocks were found to have needles, and 96 blocks were spoiled with piles of feces. And I believe that the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a good example of an historical event and the trends in the homeless population, as well as the San Francisco article really helps us understand the current societal perceptions. Some of the historical oppression that took place, although not necessarily intentional, but when Ronald Reagan signed the Lanterman-Petrie Short Act, it put an end to mentally ill patients being institutionalized involuntarily. There was also funding that was supposed to go into place to help people with services, alternative services and housing, but it ended up not really being enough, and a lot of the people ended up on the streets. Another way, however, that there was historical oppression within the institutions were the high-risk experimental procedures such as lobotomies. I do think there might have been a possible pendulum swing where they had no rights and they were stuck in these institutions, and then the pendulum swung and they have all the rights to make decisions, even if it's not necessarily the best. So that actually leads me to the current oppression, where I believe that remaining on the streets without adequate care is also part of the current oppression. So one argument is that there is a need for more affordable housing. The other argument is we need more of a change in policy, specifically on conservatorship, which one woman, Diane Shinstock, she has a son that has severe schizophrenia, and she is not able to help him because the system just says, nope, he can make his choices, and she really wants to help him. So she and her husband are currently working on changing policy here in California. The first documentary I watched was called Us and Them. It was a woman that followed 4 homeless individuals and their stories. It was really interesting. What I learned from this documentary, though, was a guy named Dr. Matei. He works with the homeless population. He was talking about the number of people who've experienced abuse as children. He said he's never met anyone that hadn't experienced abuse on the streets. And he was just talking about the importance of talking about that trauma, even though it's difficult, because it will help them to maybe get out of their addiction. So the second documentary that I watched, God Knows Where I Am, really great documentary. A woman was struggling with schizophrenia. There was one time where she was taking medication and knew that she needed to be on medication for the rest of her life. And then she ended up off for a little bit, and then there was no going back. She just never thought that she had schizophrenia, never thought she needed medication, and just the downward spiral that her life went. And that's really what I took away and learned is about her lack of being able to make rational decisions when she was not on medication because of her mental illness. Seattle is Dying was an awesome documentary as well. It was like a broad overview of the homeless crisis. It talked about encampments, and it talked about mental illness, and showed just the mentally ill people and how they struggle on the streets, and how it's just kind of inhumane. Then the last thing that I learned about, though, in that movie was the MAP program that's taking place in Rhode Island's prisons. They take care of their medical needs. They take care of giving them medication for mental illness. They give them counseling, and it's been a really successful program, and I really loved how it was all-encompassing for them. I did my first interview with a woman named Lauren Skidmore. She is the CEO of the Bakersfield Homeless Center. And their mission statement is to provide support and resources to families and individuals in crisis while helping them to achieve their highest level of self-sufficiency. The services that they offer are a walk-in shelter. They also have case managers that help to connect people with resources and programs such as WIC. The case managers also help with basic living needs such as arranging doctor's appointments. And also they have a housing department that connects people with housing, temporary and permanent. They have a job development program as well as on-site childcare. And the way that people find out about these services, first of all, is a local ministry called Flood Ministries. They go into the streets making contact with homeless individuals, hopefully building trustworthy relationships and providing information as to the resources that are available. The other way that people learn about what is available is through law enforcement. They tell them what is offered, as well as offering them rides to those locations. And also the other way that they learn about it is through hospitals and other nonprofits. While interviewing Lauren, we discussed the greatest needs for the organization. She said that they have grant funding for a lot of things, but it's really difficult to get money for staff overhead and operational costs. And so whenever they want to start a new aspect of a program, they really have to think about fundraising and where they're going to get the money for that. So that's a pretty big need. And then also for the population, they have a greater need for medical support from the medical community. So they don't have a medical support system within their center. And so it just makes it difficult transporting, and it would be great if the medical community would get a little more involved and proactive. The challenges for the population, the steps being taken, drug use effects. It was interesting to hear about methamphetamine, that there is a new ingredient that potentially causes more isolation and paranoia. But what they're doing to combat that is, again, Flood Ministries, being able to go out there and make those connections with people and continue to try to build those relationships. They also have a lack of mental health resources. They need more, but they are actually working on hiring a mental health worker. And the importance of social justice, she just talked about the benefit of diversity and the fact that they have a really diverse staff. And just how that's really good and important. The second interview was with a woman named Tiffany. She's lived in Bakersfield her whole life, and she has been homeless for 6 years. She lives on the street with her husband, and she sounded like she was interested in being clean, but that her husband wasn't, and that was discouraging to her. And she was definitely going to stick with her husband. She said that she does fentanyl, she smokes weed, and occasionally does meth. Her interactions with the community have sounded like they were pretty positive. When I asked her what it was like, she said, "Oh yeah, people are really nice, And so I asked her, how do you like the holidays? Are you excited about the holidays? She says, oh yeah, I love the holidays, especially Christmas. So she seemed really sad when she talked about her kids. She has 5 kids, 11 and under, and it doesn't sound like she sees them too often. So that seemed to make her pretty sad as well. So she was more emotional when she talked about her husband not wanting to get clean and then also not seeing her kids very often. And it was really sad, and I just felt a lot of compassion and empathy for her. She was really nice. Some of the new knowledge gain or insights that I hadn't considered before were choosing certain drugs to alleviate other physical symptoms besides just mental illness. For instance, Tiffany had said that she uses fentanyl because she has lupus. Another thing I had not considered was people living on the streets actually maintaining a long-term marital relationship. I guess I just figured the hardships of life on the streets, that it would be challenging to be in a committed relationship, but I suppose that it does make sense that she wants to have a companion. And then thirdly, being a woman on the streets, Tiffany had mentioned that some men bully her because she is faithful to her husband. And I just hadn't really considered the dangers that are specifically for women. The Gracism book, I learned about how we can love people in marginalized populations by honoring them and lifting them up. I did see this concept being played out as I spoke with Tiffany and asked her questions about her family and her daily life. She also had a really nice, tall, beautiful sunflower sticking out of the back of her cart, and I commented on that and told her, they really did add a little niceness to the cart. So, yes. And then another aspect of the Gracism book that I found helpful is speaking in a way that shows the population honor by opening my mouth in defense when there is negativity. So I can bring truth and a compassionate perspective to the discussion. And I feel like I have already begun doing that as I've talked about this project with people and just being able to give an informed outlook. In comparing and contrasting the research and events to the interviews, I feel like the interviews gave a more local perspective as well as a personal experience talking with Tiffany. The most surprising thing about the interviews I took away was from Lauren when we talked about the Bakersfield Homeless Center and the scope of services that they offer. I think it's pretty common belief that they are mostly a shelter, but I was surprised and pleased to hear all that they offer this community. I was changed by this experience. I feel like my perception of the homeless population was pretty black and white in my thinking, and I feel like I've just been able to understand a little more of the complexity of the problem in terms of how people ended up on the streets and what keeps them there, and then also just recognizing that they feel hopeless and that they need hope. From what I've learned, I think it can be applied to counseling. Being able to have a better understanding of mental illness and addiction, understanding their pitfalls, the things that they're going to maybe struggle with if they are trying to get clean, recognizing the community aspect and that they could easily get dragged back in by the community of the homeless population, and also just their need for talking about their traumas. And then understanding their need for hope. I've realized that the people who were beginning to get clean, how hopeful they seemed, which just made me realize that they really they wanted a better life all along. They just didn't think they could ever get to that point. And so just being able to realize their need for encouragement and providing realistic expectations for them that would help them to stay engaged and not giving up. And then thirdly, I really love this program, MAT, that I think would be a great application towards counseling by meeting physical needs along with counseling and just how successful that can be.